to our Forever Young Adult Book Club. Can you believe that it is July 30th? It is insane that tomorrow is the last day of July, and then come August starts on Saturday. And for many of us here in New Mexico, we, the teachers, will be going back to work next week, and students will be going back to class virtually the week after. It is insane to think about how much time has gone by, because it just seems like for a while it was taking forever for March and for April and for May to end. And now I feel like July just totally went by in the blink of an eye. Maybe it's because I don't really want to go back to work, but that's okay. We will all have fun in this new world that we live in. So tonight we're all going to talk about some of our favorite books. Some of them might be favorite books that we read over the summer that we didn't talk about already. They might be favorite books that we have read sometime during this quarantine, during the year, but they are our favorites. And I can't speak for the others who are presenting tonight, but I can tell you it was really kind of hard to pick a book. And tonight I'm just going to talk about one book, and I thought about it. And I mean, it was like, oh, I could talk about this. And then Katie snatched my book that I wanted to talk about. So I was like, whatever. And so I was like, okay, but at least that book's going to get talked about. There's so many, and I feel like we could probably keep talking all night about our books. There's one thing we're going to tell you. We're going to talk about how these are our favorite books. We're going to give you an overview about that book. And something to keep in mind is that it's okay if you don't want to read that book. If it doesn't sound like something that you dig, don't read it. If it's something like somebody's like, oh my God, you have to, namely English teachers. So that's what we do. But we're going to tell you that they're really good and we suggest you read them. But I personally, again, not to speak for the rest of people, I don't believe that there is any one book that everybody has to read. Everybody's different. Everybody's life is different. Everybody's experiences are different. And everybody's going to get something different from a book. And so a book for me that I think is absolutely amazing, it might not fit a 14-year-old boy in high school. I mean, it could. I have some weird taste sometimes, but I'm just saying, just keep in mind, you should always read what you want to read. That is how you build a passion for reading. That is how you build stamina. And that is just how you fall in love with the act of reading, by finding what you like to read. So for tonight, I'm going to talk about a book, and I do a guilty thing is I do judge a book by its cover sometimes, because honestly, some books are just really pretty. So I went to Barnes & Noble a little while ago, and this book was sitting on the table, and it's I Killed Zoe Spanos, and it's by Kit Frick. And it was actually one of the Barnes & Noble book club books for young adults. I fell in love with the book, the cover of it. And you know why? It has blue pages on the edges. And I know some of you are like, that's weird. I don't see why that's a big deal. It's just, look, it's blue. It's so pretty. I just really like it. I've seen people on Facebook and in Facebook groups and on Pinterest, like they've colored the pages of all their books to make them like rainbow. I'm not about that life. But if the book's already printed like that, that's cool. And I just thought it was a really pretty cover. The book is about a young girl, Zoe Spanos, who dies, and she actually dies at the beginning of the book. And so it's kind of not a big deal that we already know she's dead, because it is completely in the title. But what happens is it takes place in the Hamptons, so upper northeast I was going to say New Mexico, but it's upper northeast of the United States. And Anna has got a job to be a nanny throughout the summer. And she goes to this little town in the Hamptons. And what she didn't know when she got hired was that she looks ridiculously close to Zoe Spanos. Like, people do a double take when they see Anna, and they're like, Zoe? Because Zoe went missing and her body was never found. And so this little community has been looking for her. So Anna gets there and she starts having these like memories, and she starts like as though she's living Zoe's life. She remembers things about Zoe's house, and she remembers these instances of being with Zoe, and she becomes friends with people who knew Zoe, and she meets Zoe's boyfriend who she was dating in January when she went missing. And so it becomes this huge mystery of, did Anna actually kill Zoe? Because the first chapter, no spoilers, the first chapter, she's in the police station saying, I killed Zoe Spanos. But throughout the book, then it takes place, the perspective changes from past and present, and Anna's reflecting on it. I loved it. I was hooked. It got me to keep reading. It was literally one of those books where I was like the end of the chapter and it would end and I'd be like, I have to read another chapter because it ended and I needed to know what happened. And so I read it in a day. Absolutely loved it. It's in one of those like crime teen fiction drama books. If you've read One of Us is Lying or One of Us is Next, or I think someone talked about The Good Girl's Guide to Murder earlier in the episodes. And so these mysteries, if Truly Devious, that series, it's just a mystery. And I love mysteries. I love them as an adult and I love them as YA. And thankfully, YA is publishing a lot more mysteries. So check it out. I Killed Zoe Spanos, if it sounds like something you want to read. And next, I'm going to send it to Katie, who is going to talk about another one of my favorites.
Thank you. Yes, this book that I'm going to talk about tonight was actually a favorite of Misty's, and she said, Katie, you're a drama teacher. You would love this book too. And I was like, okay, here you go. So I'm going to present my screen because as we've talked about, we share books that we love. It goes around the book club. It'll go around our friend circle and at school and all that good stuff. So the book that I'm going to read, I'm hoping my screen is presenting, but I'm reading a book called, or I read a book called Foul is Fair by Hannah Kaplan. And it is a retelling, it's a young adult retelling of Shakespeare's Macbeth. It is centered around a girl named Jade, and Jade and her friends, her coven, are seeking revenge on the boys at this particular prep school down the road from them who assault Jade at a party one night. And there's planning and there's scheming and there's plotting and the girls engross themselves in their new school. Jade adopts a whole new identity and she just inserts herself into the life of these boys who have no idea who she is. She's just another girl at school, and she just takes them out one by one, like they do in Macbeth, in order for the character Mac, who is this version of Macbeth, to take over. He becomes top dog at the school. And it is a brutal retelling of this. There is a lot of talk about violence that Jade had as she starts to remember what happened. There's a lot of violence against the boys. They all die because they also all die in Macbeth. It's not really a spoiler. They die in really gruesome ways, and her coven has no regrets. They just sort of go all out to get revenge for their sister on what happened to her. I love this book. It fits sort of also like Misty's book in the mystery crime genre, but it definitely sits in the retelling genre, which we've talked about in previous episodes, that we in this group love retellings. And if you are a drama nerd, if you are an English nerd, if you're an upper level English student and maybe you have to read Macbeth for school, this is a good companion piece. It's so good. It was definitely a book like Misty's book where I was like, well, dang, now I have to keep reading because I got to figure out what the sisters, what they do next. So 10 out of 10, Foul is Fair by Hannah Kaplan. And now I believe I'm going to pass it over to my friend Heather.
Yes, and just so that Katie knows, the person who has her copy of Foul is Fair is me. So it's next on my list. And thankfully, the book police, Misty Horning, decided to remind me that I had this book. And if she would check her Instagram message today, she would see I sent her a message, in fact, to let her know that a friend is a noun for a person you trust so much, you'll loan them a book. So she needs, and I emphasize trust. This just happened today. So my favorite book, I switched on the fly because I missed the favorite book memo. And so I grabbed this from my shelf. I just got it returned to me, actually, from a loaner. This is called The Strange and Beautiful Sorrows of Ava Lavender by Leslie Walton. Magical realism is one of my favorite genres, wrapped up in like love stories and kind of fairy tale-ish story. Ava Lavender is the third of a multi-generation story of women who have kind of had heartbreaks and losses in love. They end up as a family, grandmother, mother, and daughter, migrating to the West. It feels like it's kind of, turn of the century time period. But Ava also has wings. She grows wings. And so her parents keep her locked inside, or her mom keeps her locked inside. But she still ends up kind of having this kind of broken-hearted love story. So in magical realism, I always feel like it has a feeling when you read these kind of books. Like you can sense like there's something else going around, or you're in this cloud that's floating, but there's enough like real about it. There's enough about the story that feels like that could be me, but like you're just suspended in this big old cloud all the time of this world. I always used to tell students when I was librarian, magical realism feels like the movie Hope Floats. And I would say that, I don't know if it's relevant for kids now, but I would say this is kind of one of those books that feels like Hope Floats. And usually in a group, 2 or 3 people would go, oh, okay. So they get it. So I really recommend The Strange and Beautiful Sorrows of Ava Lavender by Leslie Walton. And now I'm turning it over to Adrian, I believe, correct? Yes.
Steve Pinzone, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to skip you in this list. I'm bad at reading. So we're going to have Steve Pinzone go next, and then we'll get back on the regular order. My bad. I got too excited about Foul is Fair. So, Steve.
It's all good. No worries. I felt for favorites, I'd talk about a couple graphic novels because comics are one of my favorite things to read. And the first book I'm going to talk about is Catherine's War, written by Julia Billet and drawn by Clara Fauvel. And this book I just picked up on a whim. It looked interesting enough to purchase it, and I read it, and I absolutely loved it. And it encapsulates some of my favorite things in books, especially for younger readers. This is probably a good middle school read. It's a story of this girl, Rachel Cohen. She has to change her name because she is a Jewish girl and she's in hiding during France during World War II. And it's essentially her coming of age story. And she spends time in this children's home run by this married couple who they kind of form their own school to teach the children who are hiding from the Nazi regime. And it's historical fiction about World War II. So that's always one of my favorite topics. And I really enjoy learning about that through literature and especially comics. Because reading books about history can be sort of dry and a little boring, in my opinion. But when you read it through the power of story or something immersive like a comic, you have such great visuals, images, and text to really transport you. And it really feels like a little bit of time travel when you read a comic placed in the past. And what's also cool about this book, Rachel, she gets a camera and she falls in love with photography. And it's her love of photography and learning how to take pictures and capture all these beautiful moments during this wartime. And that kind of is her little outlet and gets her through. It's just a real touching story. And actually, this author, Julia Billet, she wrote a book called Catherine's War, and then she adapted it. I didn't know this until I finished the book and was reading some of the endnotes, but she adapted this into a graphic novel. And it's just a beautiful, you can read it in the evening, and she has some notes in the back about historical facts of the time and, what was true in the story, what wasn't true. What was absolutely true is that married couple who ran the children's home. And what was interesting about that is they sort of took an independent approach to schooling. And you can see where the ideas for, charter type schooling developed from people like this couple who ran their own schooling system at a children's home. It's just a great story, and that's my time, so I'm going to pass it on to Adrian next.
Thank you. The first book I'm going to talk about is Irish writer Sarah Rees Bredin's novel In Other Lands. I love this book so much. This book was first published in serial installments on her blog, and it became so popular that she decided to make a novel of it, or make a book of it. The story begins with Elliot at age 13, follows the next 4 years of his life in a magic school. He's a student in a magic school in a place called the Borderlands. He has no friends in the real world, a mother who ran off when he was a baby, and a father who couldn't care less. Elliot understandably has a few issues. He uses sarcasm as a coping mechanism, much like many people I know, including myself. Nevertheless, he befriends an elven warrior named Serene and a human named Luke. Luke is literally the golden boy. He's blonde. Elliot's the redhead in this book, and he's good at everything involving sports or fighting. Luke is also a member of a very prominent, large, loving magic family, and so has to constantly meet high family expectations. Elliot is the nerd this time. He has a very sarcastic, abrasive personality, and he's sure that the rules apply to everyone except him. Serene is the boarding school's only elf. In elf culture, the boys are seen as the softer sex. Elf boys are treated exactly the way like overprotective Victorian parents treat girls in the human world. Serene's an accomplished fighter, as deadly with her bow and arrows as with her sword, and she immediately reassures Elliot that she'll protect him from harm. He wants no part of fighting. He's more than happy to participate in the boarding schools. There's a counselor training track as opposed to the war training track to learn to become a diplomat and sign treaties between the various magic land races, like elves. They have dwarves, trolls, harpies, mermaids, like the mermaid on the book. It's one of the most unique takes on the ordinary person comes to a fantasy world I've ever encountered. It's the tale of the sidekick, the one who gets left behind, the one who's in the shadow of the protagonist. It's about learning how to live with coming in second, but it's also a lot more than that. Elliot's character is so realistic and genuine, you barely notice that it's happening until the end, and you realize he's a completely different person. He's matured, he's become comfortable with himself in the world. It's a really good coming of age story. The book was published in 2017. Although it's a standalone book so far, I would definitely read a sequel if she ever came out with one, and I give it 5 out of 5 stars. I'm now going to turn it back over to Steve.
Okay, next book I'm going to talk about is called Dragon Hoops by Jean Wen Yang. And maybe some of you out there have read some of his other comics, graphic novels like American Born Chinese or Boxers and Saints. This is his newest graphic novel that came out this year, and it's a nice thick one. It's a good 400 plus pages. This kind of touches on one of my favorite genres of the standalone graphic novel, which is memoir. Now, I consider this is a memoir because it's Gene he was a high school teacher, and one year he got to know the high school that he taught at. He got to know this basketball team, and he spent a lot of time with the basketball team because they have this great team, but it's been a while since they've won a championship, and this is the year that they might go all the way. And I'm not the biggest sports fan, and the thing is, Gene isn't at all. He doesn't know anything about basketball, but he starts to get interested in this basketball team and the coach, and basically he spends the next year of the season getting to know the coach and all the players and going to the games, and he basically writes this graphic novel about that time in his life, about the team going to the championship. And what makes it really interesting is, well, it is a memoir all the way through, so you have some meta moments where Gene's kind of joking about, I don't know if I should include this person in the novel, but you already read a chapter before where it was a whole chapter about that person, and he's kind of making little tongue-in-cheek jokes to you, the reader, and stuff about him figuring out how to get this book written. But what fascinates me about this book is you, just like Gene, you kind of get sucked into the world of this basketball team, and they're called the Dragons, by the way. So you get sucked into the world of this basketball team, and you start to get invested in the coach, in the characters, and the team, and you're starting to root for them the way that he is. And the way that Gene does that as the writer, illustrator of this book, is he gives you the backstory. So like each chapter is devoted to like a different person, like a different player in the team, and you start to find out all the backstories of how each team member had to face their own adversity. And then it becomes a story about a much bigger thing. It becomes about a story of immigrants and minorities and the adversities that they've had to face and overcome to be where they are today. And that's a theme that ties deeply to Gene as an American Chinese man that is prevalent in a lot of his works. So it's kind of cool how this basketball team becomes a vehicle for telling that sort of story. And it's just perfectly done in terms of bright, awesome, cartoony art. And you also learn little tidbits about history, about the different people's backgrounds. I can't recommend this enough. If you're in for a nice, deep, long comic read, I recommend this. I'm going to pass it off to Deborah.
Thanks, Steve. So here's the book that I'm going to talk about. It's called On the Come Up by Angie Thomas. Now, this is Angie Thomas's second. Her first book was The Hate U Give, which was hugely popular. I'm the only one on the planet who has not read The Hate U Give. However, I started with this book because it's about a girl who's a rapper. And the reason I got this book, I added it to my classroom library this past year, and I got it because I had a kid who was totally into writing rap music. And I was trying to sort of like find books for him to read. So I found this book. I don't think he read it, but I ended up bringing it home during the pandemic, and I read it. So On the Come Up, the main character in On the Come Up is Bree, or Brianna. She's a 16-year-old Black girl. She lives in an inner city, big city somewhere. And her father, who is now dead, was a semi-famous rap artist. He got involved in some street violence and some gang violence there where they live, and he was killed. Her mother went into a tailspin when the dad died and kind of became a drug addict, but has recently, in the last few years, gotten it together, come back home, reclaimed her kids, and they're trying to make a go of it. They live kind of on the edge of poverty. It's her mother, and her brother. They never know if they're going to have food in the fridge, if the electricity is going to be turned off. And mom ends up, during the course of the book, losing her job. And so we have that playing out. There's a really big emphasis on the economic situation. Bree's at a kind of a private school for the arts, and she gets into a situation one day where she goes up against two security guards who happen to be white. She has a little bit of an attitude, and not surprisingly, things don't go well when they decide that maybe she's smuggling drugs. She's not. She's actually smuggling in candy to sell to other kids. But she ends up in a confrontation that kind of looks like a news article from the newspapers these days, where she gets thrown to the ground in this confrontation with these security guards. She writes a rap song about her frustration with the injustice, the racism, and basically her powerlessness in that community. And the rap song just takes off and starts to become a viral hit. The song is called On the Come Up, which is kind of like on her way up the ladder. Unfortunately, Bree finds out that those words that she put together for the rap song have a whole lot of power. And some of the power those words have is not the power she intended for them to have. Like, she is trying to express her feelings, and it's getting taken in a way that's making her out to be one of the violent people causing the problems. So I liked this book. Now, I know we were talking about our favorite books. As an adult, this was not my favorite book of all time, but I really liked the fact that this will speak to a lot of the kids that I know because they are so invested in their music. And this book is about expressing yourself creatively, either through music or through writing, because rap ends up doing both. And right now, I think we really have a need for those ways of expression. And I think the kids really have a need for those ways of expression. The characters do come alive in the book. I kind of liked Bree. I liked her family. I liked the situation she was in. She started out feeling a little sorry for herself and ended up growing up and kind of seeing life the way it really is and deciding that she had to grow into who she was supposed to be. So Angie Thomas, the author of this, well, was actually a rap star, if you will. She was a rap artist in college, whatever that means. And she notes in her acknowledgments at the end of the book, she says one of her thank yous is to hip hop. She says, thank you for being my voice, for giving me a voice, and for showing me myself. So I recommend this book, especially for you or for kids or whoever knows what it's like to go out and try to find your voice. So On the Come Up, Angie Thomas. And I will turn it back over to Adrienne.
Thank you, Deborah. The last book I'm going to talk about is Love Boat Taipei by Abigail Hing Wen. I picked this book up. It was a Barnes Noble book group. They have a YA book group, which I go to. Sometime I'm the only person there, grown up or kid. The story is about a young Asian American girl named Ever, and her parents decide she's being too rebellious. She has a dream of being a dancer, and they want her to go to medical school. Her dad wasn't able to, he was a doctor back in China, and when they came to the United States, he wasn't able to be a doctor there, so they've always had this dream of her being a doctor. So it's a lot of parental expectations, things like that. They decide to send her to a strict immersion program in Taiwan for the summer. She's obviously very upset. Once she gets there, she finds the reality much different than what she expected. Its nickname is the Love Boat, and although the program is strict during the day, at night everyone sneaks out to enjoy Taipei's nightlife. I have really mixed feelings about this book. First, the good parts. The character development and plotline were excellent. I kept wanting to know, kept my interest. I kept wanting to know what happened to Ever on her journey. It was fun to read. I also think it's important to hear the voice of someone living between two cultures. She's trying her best to follow her passion, doing what she feels is the right thing by her parents and their experience. So she's very torn. While Ever's is an Asian American experience, I think it's something that resonates to any immigrant, and the process of coming to one's own identity is universal for teens. What I did have trouble with, as I felt many heavy topics were glanced over or rushed. There are topics, pretty heavy topics in the book, such as mental health, depression, suicidal thoughts. There's a love triangle with cheating involved, and a lot of toxic ways teen girls can treat other girls. I'm not saying that this content shouldn't be included. I've read a lot of books where they were included and they dealt with them. It just should be developed and handled properly. I feel like this book didn't provide a good example of how to find healthy resolutions. Things were either resolved or glossed over in unhealthy ways. So I think sometimes that can do more harm than good. Even with that, though, I do give the book a solid 3 out of 5, I think. And I did like that it didn't have a simple resolution or a feel-good surprise ending, which is kind of what you expect in some of these books. But I did enjoy it. And now back to Heather.
Hello. Sorry, I've had some pop-ups pop up in the way. So we are in a transition, I think, in our world. There's lots of challenges all around us. There's lots of opportunities. Tonight we heard about books that originated because an author started writing on a blog, or maybe an author had a passion for drawing or photography, and they turned it into an ability to write a book and share a story and transport us somewhere else. We heard about books that transport us to different historical times or to different places across the country. We learned that you can judge books not just by their covers, but by the colors of their pages. and maybe the artwork inside. We all want to find something that's real. We want to find people we can share our story with this. And I think it brings us into a world, and it helps us know that we are seen. They don't have to be people like us. We don't always have to be a girl with wings or a basketball star or a mean girl or a rapper, right? We just want to get sucked into their world. We want to know that the story is something we can understand. And so they can be real, they can be raw, they can be magical. But now more than ever, it's time that we start realizing that we don't have to have guilt about wasting time in a book or reading what you want to read. Out of this, we might learn some new words for the SAT. We might learn some fancy words that help us listen into a lecture online that we know we might otherwise ignore. And we might find something that inspires us to a new hobby. So there's lots of opportunities in letting people just read what they want to read. The worst case scenario is it gives you something interesting to talk about, for 2 minutes or less. That's not about contact tracing or public health orders. So I encourage us all to find a favorite book, share a favorite book, and exercise your right to read. That's all.
Okay, everybody. We will see you in 2 weeks for our next book club adventure. And if everybody wants to jump on, unmute their mics and say goodbye.
Bye. Have fun.